Hi there, welcome to the first of another series of videos. This one is going to be using the Black Square King Air as a sort of work example aircraft. It's been a while since I've done any videos, so I thought it probably worth doing a bit of an introduction. I've got some new subscribers and there's new people looking at the videos, so a quick reset and explain what I'm trying to do here with these videos. I'm not intending to give you a full working solution. It's not one I could sort of publish and say this is it, this is the answer. And also, I'm not a pilot, so I'm learning my way around these aircrafts and discovering how the systems work myself anyway. But the intention is to sort of show you how I go about doing the research, finding the bits and pieces and programming it together, and hopefully you can apply them to your own solutions. It doesn't even have to be this King Air. These sort of techniques will work for almost any of the aircraft. And also, it doesn't have to be exactly the same hardware that I've got. It should work for most hardware. The key item on it, of course, is Axis and O's. That's the interface software. So that's the key feature that you need to have. If you haven't got Axis and O's, I'm not sure this will be much use to you if you're using a different system. I've not used any of the other interface software. Anyway, that said, let's sort of get some basics out of the way and explain what I've got and what I'm going to do over the next couple of videos. And some sort of introductory bits that we need to be aware of. So this is my setup. This is what it looks like from where I'm sitting. So obviously sort of bottom upwards, a standard pair of rudder pedals. These happen to be the Logitech ones, and generally we don't need to worry about those. That's the same function in every aircraft. Then I've got a Honeycomb yoke, and sitting on top of that, a Stream Deck. Then over here on the right hand side, I've got the Honeycomb throttle quadrants, and above that, a MIDI controller. It's really a sort of meant to be for use for music studios, that sort of stuff. But Axis and O's understands MIDI, so it works really well. It's very flexible. So the idea is to try and set this up so that I can fly a variety of different aircraft rather than building a sort of bespoke cockpit. That's what I'm going for. So let's have a quick few close-ups if you've not seen these actual ones. Compare it to a yoke you may have. So it's got some buttons which are labelled now. As standard, when you sort of plug and play, put them into the simulator, it will allocate immediately an action, an appropriate action to each of these. But then this is sort of based on the Cessna 172, and we want to use this for a variety of aircraft. So we may want to use these buttons for something else. Now, probably it's the same lights. You're going to need those for just about every aircraft you do, but it may be that they act in different ways. They may have different circuitry or something in programmed into it. So the standard on-off functions may not work. So we'll come to that as we get into it. And again, not every aircraft we fly will have two avionics buses. Not everyone will have magnetos, and some will be twin engines. So these things here that we can take control of and do things with. But every plane we fly is going to have the same function for the yoke itself. But again, the buttons on the yoke may do different things. The Stream Deck is a really flexible device, so you can sort of build the cockpit buttons for any aircraft you fly pretty much. And these, every button is completely programmable, and you're not just confined to this number of buttons, if you see what I mean. That's a folder icon. When I click on that, the whole of the system gets reallocated, reprogrammed. So you've got effectively an infinite number of buttons to work with. And you can put any graphic you like on them. So it's an absolutely remarkable device, well worth looking at. On the right hand side, I've got the Honeycomb throttle quadrant, and we'll look at more closely in a bit. And on top is this MIDI controller, and after I've sort of decided what's going to go where and what the different functions are, I print out one of these sort of templates of foil to go over the top and cut that out so that for each aircraft I know what the buttons are going to do. Close up look at the throttle quadrant, which I'm afraid didn't realise how dirty it had got until I looked at this picture. It's a fairly flexible unit that all of these levers can be pulled off and swapped around, and it comes with other levers, commercial aircraft levers and things like that. So this is quite a flexible layout. They have marked various bits on them, but they're not always relevant for every aircraft. You kind of have to ignore what's going on there. Trim wheel, gear up, gear down, flaps increase and decrease. They sort of a switch rather than a lever. Other aircraft you may want to sort of have more fine control over the flaps, so you can allocate one of these to be a flap lever, all sorts of stuff you can do with that. But obviously this is going to vary from aircraft to aircraft. There is an annunciator panel, which is again pretty basic. It's a sort of light GA type thing, so it may or may not be relevant to the aircraft you'll be flying. These switches are not marked. Now again, they do by default when you plug them in. It again controls the same set of lights that are on the yoke, the beacon, the nav lights, that kind of stuff. But we can remove that and make that do whatever we want it to do. There's 7 switches there. But above that is a kind of an interesting take on the autopilot panel. Again, aimed at general aviation aircraft. So you've got the different modes, heading, nav, approach modes, fairly obvious what they do. And this button here changes the mode that this increase, decrease knob is going to be. So if you have it switched to the altitude mode, then it will change the target altitude. If you have it for vertical speed, it will change the value for that. Heading, bug, the course, and the indicating airspeed. So that works generally for all the aircraft, so I kind of don't fiddle with that, or the autopilot on or off. That button just does what it's meant to do. And then the last option on here is this X-Touch Mini. So it's a MIDI controller that's meant to be used for music software, hence the forwards and backwards and loops and stuff. It's again really flexible. You've got 8 rotary controllers, which are like full motion. They turn more than 360 degrees. Some manufacturers, their MIDI controllers kind of go 360 and then they stop, and that's the end of it. These go around infinitely, which is really good. LEDs around the outside of them that we can program. Each rotary controller is also a press button. You click on it and it registers you pressed it. And 16, again, soft touch buttons. They're not toggles, they don't hold in, they just make a contact with LEDs that we can program. And there's 2 layers, so you can have layer A doing one function. When you click to layer B, everything has a second function as you reprogram it to do what you like. With a bit of programming trickery, actually, you can make these do multiple things. So what I'd often do is, staying on layer A, I would have this as, say, the COM1 radio, and have it doing megahertz, and then when I click on that, it changes it to kilohertz. So you could have COM1 on bank A and COM2 on bank B, or have your COM radio and then change it to a nav radio. It's there's so many different ways of using this. It's amazing. It's a great piece of hardware. In software terms, let's get rid of this. Let's bear with me while I find the right button. Okay, in software terms, this is what I use. Well, obviously, I've got axes and O's, and we'll be doing a lot of work with that, and the Stream Deck software as well, which we won't be looking at in this video, but we'll look at it in another video. But I thought I'd better sort of bring this into play as well, because this is what caused everything. I started using a head tracker, so as I move my head, the image on the screen moves as well if you use a head tracker. And the original one I used was Track IR, which looks at as an infrared sensor. And it either requires you to wear a hat with reflectors on, or to have sort of a bunch of LEDs on your headphone, which was a bit of a pain because it means you've got wires and things everywhere. And also it detects, or the detectors get confused by having lights on in the room or sunlight behind you because it's looking for infrared. So I've kind of moved to this now, which is a free piece of software called OpenTrack, and it works with just about any webcam as well. So it's a free option. And I've done videos, and there are plenty of videos on the internet about how to set this up, but this is the one I've just come to. This is the setup I use. Neural net tracker as the input, free track as the output, and the filter is for natural movement. And there's a bit of fiddling behind the scenes to get the sensitivity sorted out and that kind of stuff. If I start that, you should see it start moving in a minute. There. So it's not going to move the image on the screen because we're not actually in this simulator, but you can see that it's detecting my head movements. And it's a tiny bit laggy. There are paid for versions of this kind of software which are probably a bit smoother, but it works fine for free. Anyway, that's sort of where we are. This is what we've got. And obviously we've got the flight simulator. So a couple of questions I've had to answer for other people they've asked, so I'll say it again here. First thing to note is that we will need to be, we'll really want to be in developer mode when we're doing this. So in the general options, this is where developer mode is. So switch that on and save that. It gives us a number of tools which we'll look at in more detail in a minute, but it also stops any flights you do in this mode going into your log, into your pilot's log. So you feel free to do as many test flights and crashes and silly things as you like, and it doesn't enter into your log, which is quite useful. While we're in the options section, this is where we need to do a bit of work if you haven't been here before on the control options. I said by default, all of these buttons here on the flight controller are already allocated. And really what you need to think about is which ones are likely to change from aircraft to aircraft and which one's going to stay the same. Ones that's going to stay the same, they're usually pretty well set up, so you can leave them as they are. So yeah, the flight control surfaces, the ailerons, elevators, they're all okay. I've left those, and I'm also leaving the rudder trim and the elevator trim, so the electric versions of those, untouched, because if they're available on the joysticks in the actual aircraft, they work here fine, so you don't need to change those at all. And the autopilot on off, that's when you may want to change there if you're going to use the push to talk feature for anything. And I've also left the camera settings as they are, so this hat switch and this button here work to change the different views. They probably need a bit of optimizing, but I never get around to doing that. So I've left those exactly as they are. So what I've done is I've gone through and removed any mappings for those switches there. And on the throttle quadrant side, again, I've removed any mapping for the levers, so all the axes are gone. I programmed those through axes and O's. Anything to do with these switches here I've taken out. I take out the trim wheel because I programmed that set differently for different aircraft. They have different sensitivities, and you need to work with that to make that more realistic. But I leave in anything to do with the autopilots and the flap lever there. I've just left that exactly as it is, and the autopilot button there. So that's kind of how I've set that up, so that those will have to be controlled through axes and O's. Let's get out of that. So when it comes to sort of, they call it spawning, starting a flight, it doesn't really matter which aircraft you're at, which airport you're at. And that's where I happen to land last. But what I do recommend though is that you start in a parking bay, a ramp or something somewhere, not on the runway. Firstly, I don't know how many times you've had it. You've gone to take off and there's somebody sitting on the runway and they seem to sit there for hours. And I assume that they're either looking through their cockpit or getting used to things or even programming stuff. They've left it in multiplayer mode and they're just in the way. So starting off the runway, if you forget to change the other settings, then that helps. Secondly, if you do start on the runway, it'll start everything switched on by default. It'll have your engines running and all the lights and everything switched on, but you haven't done that in your hardware. It's happening in software, so things are out of sync. If you start here, it'll be cold and dark. So in the flight conditions, I turn off all the multiplayer options, so that it shouldn't be seen by anybody else. Of course, I can't guarantee that because I've no idea what I look like from other people's views, but that's what I assume is happening. And choose an appropriate weather condition and appropriate lighting for the time that you're flying. I'm going to make it a little bit more daylight because I don't want it to move into dusk as I'm doing the development. Makes it hard to see things in the cockpit when you've got no electricity on. But you can choose if you wanted to test how the wipers work in the rain or something. You can change that. Anyway, that's the basics. What I'm going to do now is I'll pause the recording and I will get into the aircraft and we'll talk about a few other basic things that we need to be aware of. Okay, so as if by magic, we're now in the cockpit. Saved you watching my loading screen for a couple of minutes. I've already done a fair bit of development with this one, so that's why this is full. But just to talk about here, the scripting. There's a section here which says read the H files, the H variables and the B variables from the sim files. Now you can't do that once you've loaded an aircraft. You need to, if you want to do that, you need to do it before you actually run an aircraft. I don't think you need to do it anymore, really. Those are a bit redundant and they do get picked up by another process, as far as I can see. So I haven't been doing that for a while. But the LVARs, again, you can't do that because it doesn't know which aircraft you're going to fly. These are the local variables, ones that are kind of used by the developers who created this version of the aircraft. So we're going to be using those. Let's just have a quick sort of demonstration. If I use my script editor to show you what's going on. If I go to insert my variables, these are the ones that are sort of native. They're the ones created by Microsoft and Asobo, work mostly with basic aircraft that come with it. And they're the ones that kind of get overwritten by the developers of these more complex aircraft. They use extensively these local variables. And this is what we've got available to us at the moment. This will be pretty much empty until you launch an aircraft and it brings in what it's already discovered has been activated. So there will be various bits and pieces because as in the loading process, it knows what you've got, and there will be these active variables because it's already run some of the scripts and bits and pieces that I've got programmed in. Again, this will be empty until you load an aircraft. But if we go back to here and tell it to read the LVARs from the sim, it'll go through the actual files and it will reveal what's all of the variables used by this programmer. If you went through and activated everything, if you clicked every switch and every button, then they would also activate them. So some of them are sort of in the background and haven't yet been triggered. Sorry, slight interruption there. Don't know if you noticed the edit. Someone at the door, and the dog was barking like mad. Anyway, we're back now. I've I've read the LVARs, and if I now go again into my script editor and look at the list of variables that we've got in the LVARs, so we'll just refresh this list here. We've now got, these are the active ones, the ones it knows about, but it's also picked up, I don't know how many, but just loads and loads of extra variables that we might want to use in our programming. So if there's something you can't find, it's probably because you haven't clicked on something or actively told it to look for the LVARs. So it's well worth doing that and getting this to be a complete list. So that's kind of essential that you do that. The next bit that we'll be looking at here will be this tool, the behaviors tool, and this is where I get most of my information from. What it's doing is looking at the XML files. Some of them are the internal ones. The way Black Square work making their aircraft is that they take a standard Asobo Microsoft one. They don't do anything to the external work. The airframe part. They work on the cockpit and the systems inside, and the flight model to some extent. So there will be the sort of standard XML files as part of it, but they will have their own bits that they've added as well. And so we're looking for this one here, which is the analog King Air. Now, if you're working on other aircraft, it may have something like Cessna Interior or Cessna Cockpit, and that will probably be the one, the bespoke extra bit that you're looking for. So if you load that XML file, and then you'll have here all the different sections that they've made adjustments to or added to, and if you click on any part of that, then it changes down here, and you can dig through here and look for switches, and it usually reveals various different parts of it. Just to give you an example here, what I'm going to do is use this component search, and I'm going to do some work with the beacon light. So I've just typed beacon in here, and it's found 7 results in various different places. And I want to sort of do a demonstration of the beacon light switch. Now, what I'm going to do is nowhere near what I would do to make the switch work, but just using this as an example at the moment. So in the template here, we can start to see information about what they're using to make the switch work. And here's the various different variables, and there's a B variable they're using here. So this is where I go in to get my clues about how on earth the switch is working if it's not working as standard. But we'll come back to that later. And also got these input events we can look at, and that is another place we can start to get clues about what's going on with the lighting, how things are working. And there's beacon here, look, a bit more, so we can start to see various other, gives us clues about what we might need to be doing to look at things. And the last thing is the local variables, the LVARs, that we can actually start to hone in and have a look at some for variables. So again, if we type beacon in there and see if there's anything, also not in that one, let's change that model back again. I've gone to the wrong filter. I want that king air analog. Here we go. And it's this filter here I want to click into. Beacon here. And here we can see the value of that beacon variable. So if I go down to my beacon switch here, as I flick that switch, you can see that it's registering. Well, we don't know quite what it's registering, to be honest. Is it actually just the switch position, or is it the circuit being live behind? And it's quite variable from aircraft to aircraft and developer to developer exactly what's behind this, and that's where that behavior thing helps us. Sometimes just finding the command that make the animation work also livens the circuit behind and make things work completely. Sometimes you have to do both, flip the switch and manually turn on the circuit behind. Sometimes just turning the circuit on also triggers the animation. It does seem to be quite variable, and you'll see that in a later video how we deal with some of that. But what I wanted to do was to show you a kind of strange quirk. And I need to bring in axis NOs. It's not a full programming language, it is scripting, and there's a kind of significant difference between it. What I want to do is to be able to toggle the light switch on and off. So I would put it in sim event. So these are the native ones that sometimes still work, but quite often they're overwritten. So we've got these Microsoft input events, which are often more sophisticated, and they're the ones that a developer can work on. So out of choice, I tend to use one of those. And here's my beacon one. Now they have made this one a bit more sophisticated, that it can take more inputs than just on off, that you could have more than one beacon circuit doing different lights, or it could be controlled by the pilot or co-pilot. So they've done something to it. But if we look in here, we've got a complete access to a B variable, and that's what I'm going to use here, not a toggle one. I'm going to use this one here to set. I said this isn't how I would normally do things. I'm just using this to try and show you a problem, a feature of this scripting language. So how this reads is we've got a value and we're going to put that value into this variable. That's what this little it looks like a greater than sign. It's a pipeline. It says take that and put it into here, this variable. And what I'll do is I'm going to ask it to watch that variable, so we can keep an eye on what's going on. So I'm going to select that variable, and we can filter here for beacon. And we'll add that. So at the moment that's saying it's 0, and this command here is telling it to put a 1 in there. So if I click that button there, test, that should change to 1 and that beacon should switch on, which it does. Okay, so we've made that work. Now to turn it off, I'd have to send a 0 to it. So we can write two different functions, one for on, one for off, and that's quite easy to do that. Or you may want to try and set up a toggle, so every time I press it, it goes from one state to the other. So what we would do with that, to save me doing any more typing, I'm going to copy that and take that 0 out, and we need to put some brackets around it. And what that's doing at the moment is saying, read that B value and then write it into there. So it's not actually going to do anything. But if I put that, it now says take that value and invert it. If it's change all the zeros to 1, all the ones to zeros, sort of binary thing. So this is 0 at the moment. Take that one, write it into there, and then that should turn that on. So click test, and that's switch that on. And now I should be able to turn that off. And we're not seeing the variable change because I've left the B off the front. Let's put the B on the front. Okay, that's on, and press again. That's off, and that's at 0. So we'll get rid of that one. We just got that. That's working absolutely fine. This is where the wrinkle comes. We may want to have something switch on because an event has occurred or something has happened, and we're looking at this other event to control the fact this light is on. It's not realistic in this case. You wouldn't turn the beacon on or off for this, but I'm just doing this as a demonstration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create my own variable. And you can create your own variable just calling an L, a local variable, and give it whatever name you like. Now, I always start mine with my, so I know that I created it. It's not come from anybody else. I'll just call it my demo. And it's an on-off, it's a Boolean. So I've created that variable there. And what I'm going to do is I'll copy that. We'll watch that variable, so we'll paste it in there. Now by default, because I haven't done anything with it, it's going to be created as a 0. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to ask it to get that value and invert it. Okay, so what will happen when I press this, that 0 will become 1. And I want this to change so that we don't use this here. We're going to take that value there and write it directly into here. So if something happens here, we want it to turn that. So at the moment, my demo is 0. When it inverts it, it should become 1. And in a normal programming language, that will then be, say, 1, because it will say, what's the value of it? And write the 1 into here, which will turn the light on. So if we press test, we expect the light to come on, and it doesn't. Now we can see here that the variable has changed. It's changed to 1, but it hasn't written the 1 into there. It's written the 0 into it. And we'll do it again. So we know this is 1. So now it should change, in theory, should take that 1, change it to 0, grab the 0 from there and turn the lights off. So we'll run that. And you can see it's done exactly the opposite. What's actually happened is, because it's not a programming language, when it starts, it reads the variable and it does the change, but it doesn't insert the value back in at all. The value has remained, as far as the script's concerned. If it was 0, it's remained at 0. Even though it's been changed, it uses it here, and throughout this script it will remain unchanged until it finishes the script, and then it writes it back in. So things can sort of get out of sync. You have to be aware of this, that if your script changes a variable, it won't have changed at all throughout that script until the script is finished, and then it updates it. I hope that makes sense. It catches people out. It catches people out quite often that, oh, I've changed that and it's doing exactly the opposite. You can make it do the opposite by going like that and saying, from now on, do the opposite of what I told you to do. and that'll keep the two variables in sync with each other. These dots, by the way, are just space. I'm not pressing anything else or anything weird. It's just this language, scripting language, is very dependent on where the spaces are. So to highlight them, it shows a dot. Anyway, let's press the test now, and we should see that they're both 1, and now they're both 0. So you can kind of get round this weird thing with that. So I just want to sort of highlight that, you know, if you start going and trying to do your own scripting, be aware of that feature of a script language. I think it's enough pretty much for this sort of introduction to the ground we're going to cover. You've seen the hardware I've got. You understand the purpose is not to give you a complete solution, but to show you methods to get to these solutions. You've seen what my hardware is and the fact I've taken out various parts of it in the to automatically assigned, so I can overwrite those. You've seen that you need to bring in the LVARs, the behavior tools, and how to start in developer mode and be kind to people and not spawn in the middle of a runway. Okay, I will see you in the next video whenever I get around to doing the next one. And what we're going to do is work our way through sort of panel by panel and then put the whole thing together and sort of show how it all interacts. Okay, I'll see you in the next video.